Introducing the smart buying process. There are few exciting ventures than buying a home in a person's life. Like a lot of the biggest decisions, it is more emotional than coldly rational. People generally don't select a house, they want to fall in love with it. So what's a good place to start the process? The first and only way to begin the home buying process is to assess the buyer's financial situation. Our smart system determines what a buyer can afford. Typically, this comes down to how much of a loan he or she can obtain, but the system has a process in place for cash buyers too. In the loan route, the buyer is prompted to complete a loan application. We leverage the most advanced technologies in the home financing industry to provide borrowers with an efficient, transparent, and easy-to-use system. The loan application consists of 8 steps, and some of them have more than one section. The application is responsive, so the system skips sections or inputs that are not applicable to buyer based on preceding inputs. The buyer is queried about his living situation and current address in the initial steps of the application. The applicant is asked about his previous address and if they have stayed at their current address for less than 2 years. Questions regarding applicant's desired home type and location come next. Would it be a primary residence, a secondary home, or an investment property? The buyer must specify the use of the home in this step. Answers may affect financing terms. Apart from the primary borrower, this step collects information about any co-borrower such as a spouse. However, additional borrowers do not guarantee better mortgage terms. We have programs for all borrowers. If the buyer is a veteran and qualifies for a VA loan, he can avail the loan and capture its benefits. Should the applicant have questions, our specialists will be more than happy to answer them. There are 4 sections in Step 5, which is essentially about borrower's money. After we get a sense of purchase timing, desired price, and amount for down payment, the applicant must provide information about their assets. If they're receiving any funds as gifts for this purchase, it must be disclosed, as misclassified gifts can kill the deal. Again, not all pre-approvals are equal, but we try our hardest to remove the burdens, stresses, and uncertainties for the borrower through our smart process. The buyer must specify if they intend to use the sale proceeds from their current home towards the purchase of the new property. Next comes information about employment, which includes job position held by the applicant, compensation details, employer details, and time at the company. Information for previous employment will also be requested, as lenders want to see a minimum of 2 years of continuous employment history. The borrower must also disclose any other sources of income such as retirement, self-employment, etc. In Step 6 of the loan application, the borrower must answer a few government questions. By law, the lenders are required to ask these questions. It is not uncommon to find people in challenging situations, but we are confident of finding the best loan solutions for every borrower despite the challenges. We obtain applicants' consent for credit checks, as all loans have credit score requirements. In the last step of the application, the applicant must upload supporting documents that will allow us to verify their financials. These documents could be tax returns, bank statements, pay stubs, K-1s, and any other documents that provide information about income, assets, and liabilities. Not every pre-approval is equal. We make sure we take the time to fully understand the borrower's financial situation by getting all required answers and documents. We encourage buyers to confront challenges earlier rather than later. Once the loan application is complete, it is submitted to the lender for review, and the buyer can track its progress from the loan application thread, a smart workspace that navigates the buyer through the borrowing process from application to disbursal. It systematically handles all tasks, exchanges, and updates for an open application. During the review, if the lender has any further questions, they can use the messaging feature in the thread to communicate their concerns. This gives the applicant a chance to respond before the lender makes their decision. If an inherent issue is found in the loan application that cannot be easily addressed, the buyer will receive a rejection. In such cases, our loan specialists go an extra mile to explain the reasons for rejection and the steps needed to get approved in the near future. If the application checks out, the buyer will be pre-approved for a home loan. The lender will also share the limits for important loan terms and issue a loan pre-approval letter. For valid reasons, sellers are always skeptical whether the buyer is going to succeed in qualifying for the mortgage. They really don't know anything about the potential buyers coming through their door. A pre-approval letter is physical evidence of the fact that an individual is a serious buyer with the capacity to purchase. It gives the buyer leverage in negotiation, as it increases the odds of successfully closing a deal. A pre-approved buyer who is aware of their maximum drawing power can now confidently go house shopping. Our property search module is supported by an inimitable database of homes. We synthesize data using our unique listing process, which not only increases the accuracy of data but also transforms it into information that is more understandable and useful. Our map-based user interface enables our users to search, navigate and zoom to areas of interest and find and compare home information quickly and efficiently from a variety of different perspectives across homes, neighborhoods, cities, counties, and other geographic regions. The search experience supports complex search queries and filters across our dataset of homes, allowing consumers to customize their searches and gain actionable insights. If the user likes something they see, they can select the property from the list section of the module to land on the property's listing page. Here the user can find additional information on the home such as price, square footage, lot size, bed and bath count, price per square foot, days on the market, home type, as well as neighborhood information such as nearby schools, among a variety of other data points. If a user prefers to search using the map feature, they can expand the map area to take a closer look at the properties. Accordingly, the list section will shrink to a single column of properties. The user can also apply one or more filters to further narrow their search results. If that isn't enough, users can also draw shapes on the map to search properties within specific areas on the map. Hovering over a property pin in the map section, the user can view a summary of property details. For further information, the user can click on the pin to view the property's listing page. Once again, on the property listing page, the user can scroll down to learn more about the property and its neighborhood. Let's assume the property has aroused interest in the buyer, who is now ready to visit the property. They could click the Schedule a Showing option and the showing manager will take over and guide the user through the scheduling process. The buyer lands on the request page of the showings manager, which is capable of decoding user behavior to automate parts of the scheduling process. In this case, the property and appointment type are set automatically. Our smart system makes it easy to schedule showings and communicate with the counterparty. A schedule of available days and times for the seller is made available to the buyer. All the buyer needs to do is go over seller's calendar, select an available time slot that works for him, and send requests to the seller. Once an appointment request is made, it is categorized as showings I have requested in buyer's account. All showing requests require confirmation from the seller, who can also decline a showing for a number of reasons. In any case, the buyer can contact the seller at any time during the process. The showings manager was designed to allow seamless communication between parties. Let's assume the seller declines the buyer's request in this case. The appointment status changes to decline, and the reason for decline, like scheduling conflict, is also shared. To keep the buyer engaged, seller may message the buyer requesting him to reschedule at another time. In such cases, the buyer can click Request Another Time and pick another time slot from seller's calendar. Notice the system has automatically restricted 9:30 a.m. on the 14th as the seller has expressed a scheduling conflict for that time slot. After the request is made, the buyer will require seller's confirmation once again. Let's assume the seller confirms the request this time. The appointment status changes to confirmed, and a new set of options are available to the buyer on the appointment page. The idea behind these functionalities is to make the system as efficient, flexible, and transparent as possible. For example, if the buyer is running late for a showing, our system allows him to notify the seller by a click of a button. Active appointments can be canceled by either party at any time. The system accordingly notifies the counterparty about the cancellation. The activity log allows users to track all interactions between parties for a showing. Clicking the back button will bring the user to the Showings I Have Requested page, where they can track all requested appointments in a list format, along with a summary of their statuses. Any action that results in a change of the status will simultaneously reflect on this page. Back to the calendar, the buyer can view appointments and their statuses in monthly, weekly, and daily views. He can also filter appointments by status or event type. Statuses are also color-coded on the calendar, making it easier to track pending, confirmed, and declined appointments. Assuming the buyer has decided to make an offer on a home, he would pull up the property's listing page and select Negotiate Key Terms to land on the negotiation thread, a tool designed to simplify the negotiation process. At the top, the thread has a section to identify the property and the negotiating parties. Then, a separate section displays a form for recording buyer's key contract terms. The terms include purchase price, earnest money deposit, closing date, is offer contingent on financing, how closing costs are to be paid and who pays for them, and any additional terms that the buyer may have. These are critical terms for buyers and sellers, which is why we chose to address them first. Sales are typically initiated by the buyers, so once the first set of terms are submitted, the system creates a transaction which is accessible by both parties from their respective accounts. With buyer's terms submitted, the seller must now review them and accordingly make a decision. If the seller is satisfied with buyer's terms, he would accept the terms and a notification for agreement reach is appended to the thread. Should the seller find the terms unreasonable and undeserving of further negotiations, he would reject terms and a notification for terms rejected is appended to the thread. In this case, the transaction has failed and parties cannot participate in any subsequent stages of the transaction. If the seller is not fully satisfied with the offered terms, he may counter the buyer. A counter is simply an offer back to the opposing party with changes to the original terms. It is now buyer's turn to review the counter offer and decide. And for that reason, the thread also has a set of action buttons at the bottom. This too can play out in 3 different scenarios. The buyer may decide to counter the seller's proposed terms. In this case, the negotiation thread will be appended with an active form populated with inputs from seller's last submission. The buyer can then change the terms before sending them back to the seller for another review. Negotiations will continue until an agreement is reached or a party pulls out. Nevertheless, we encourage parties to engage positively to strike win-win deals so that everyone comes out happy. Should the buyer find seller's terms unreasonable and undeserving of further negotiations, he can click Reject Terms and a notification for terms rejected is appended to the thread. But let's assume the buyer accepts seller's terms and the parties reach an agreement on the key contract terms. On the transaction page, the system will now guide the buyer about the next stage in the process. To be clear, what we call a transaction is actually a smart workspace that connects everyone and everything needed to complete a transaction in one place. It is by far the most advanced and yet most simplified way to transact in the real estate market. The transaction workspace is designed to help people who have no prior experience of buying or selling in the market. To streamline the process, we have divided the transaction stages into 2 phases, namely the contract phase and the under contract phase. The contract phase begins with negotiations of key terms. In this example, the parties have already reached a favorable outcome. A log of activity is provided for each stage as actions take place. Using the terms agreed upon during negotiations, the system prepares a purchase and sale agreement and prompts both parties to sign it in the next stage. Notifications in the execute contract log lead the buyer to the prepared agreement. Our document editor allows users to effortlessly execute documents using any device. Our users also cut costs and save time by saying goodbye to paper. Gone are the days of printing, scanning, faxing, and mailing documents. Everything from the purchase and sale agreement to the settlement statement are executed and managed electronically. As the buyer opens the purchase and sale agreement, he is prompted to start signing so as to eventually complete this step. If the document is opened for the first time, the editor will prompt the buyer to adopt signature and initial. From there, the editor guides the buyer to all signature and initial fields in the document. However, it is not necessary to go through this step in one sitting. Buyers have the option to save their work and return at a later time. Our transaction coordinators are available to take any questions buyers may have about the agreement or the process. If the buyer wants a second opinion, he can share a link with his attorney for further guidance. As the buyer moves through the agreement, he will find all fields populated with information collected by the system in preceding stages. Our intelligent system identifies the property of interest and fetches all property and seller-related information from a comprehensive listing database. Meanwhile, buyer's information is pulled from the loan application and waivers database. Similarly, other databases are also used to autofill specific fields in the agreement. We abide by industry norms to keep our process as neutral as possible for all involved parties. While we manage and monitor each detail of the transaction, both parties have complete transparency of what's going on and when at every step of the way. As for e-signing, we go above and beyond mere compliance. Every signature is certified and verified to include a unique signature ID, time and date, information about the signer, IP address from the signer's location, and more. All future dates are based on the execution date of the purchase and sale agreement. Our system creates tremendous time and cost savings for both buyer and seller. Back to the transaction page. The activity log for execute contract stage has updates in line with the actions taken by the buyer. Once the contract is executed by both parties, our system immediately collects the earnest money deposit from the buyer and accordingly provides notification of deposit in the activity log. The transaction has reached the under contract phase. The phase has 8 stages. It starts with the buyer linking the transaction to a financing option before obtaining and accepting terms in the loan approval agreement. The property is then inspected, title is searched, insurance binders are prepared, and if needed, appraisal is revalidated. Should any financing conditions come up, the buyer must address them to finally close the transaction. While most of these stages concern the buyer, all parties are maintained updated throughout the phase. Now let's go through each step in a little more detail. In the activity log of Link Financing Option, the buyer is notified to link the transaction to a financing source. The included link directs the buyer to the loan applications and waivers section in his account. From there, the buyer selects a pre-approved loan application, which opens its loan thread. This loan application is not linked to any transaction, therefore it can be used to finance the buyer's ongoing transaction. Scrolling to the end of the thread, the buyer will have an option to link a transaction to the pre-approved loan application. Upon linking, the loan thread is appended with a transaction-linked notification. This loan application now cannot be linked to any other transaction unless the linked transaction fails. This will also reflect in the link financing option logged in the transaction workspace. The buyer is now prompted to review his answers on the loan application. If the buyer's financial condition has changed compared to when the loan pre-approval was issued, he must disclose the changes at this point. Withholding information can have drastic consequences, which is why our flexible system allows the buyer to edit his answers before submitting the application for loan approval. Upon submission, the lender will review answers in the loan application along with the property of interest. If any adverse, irremediable changes are found, the lender may reject the application and the contract will terminate. If the buyer's financials hold up, the buyer will be approved for a home loan. The lender will also prepare a loan approval agreement which will include all conditions the buyer must meet to get it clear to close. The step locks in the mortgage terms offered to the buyer, who must sign the agreement to indicate his acceptance of the conditions. With the loan approval agreement out of the way, the buyer can now return to the transaction page. The logs for link financing option and loan approval agreement reflect the buyer's latest activity. The process now advances to the next stage, home inspection. Home inspections are an instrumental part of the transaction. Loan approval agreements are invariably contingent on the condition of the property. Not to mention, insurance companies will not insure a home if certain conditions are found or without the presence of certifications such as a 4-point inspection. The system auto-debits buyer's account for inspection. Inspectors can request seller for an appointment using the showing manager. After conducting an inspection, the home inspector uploads the report within 24 to 48 hours and can be viewed by other parties on the thread. This is the point where property insurer reviews the report and makes a decision. Things could play out in 3 different scenarios. If something detrimental is found at the property that disqualifies it from financing, parties will be notified and the deal will be terminated. If property condition checks out, property insurer will approve the report. This also means that no repairs are needed for the property to qualify for financing. But that's not to say the buyer won't have any conditions for repairs or credits either. In the final scenario, the property insurer may approve the report but with conditions for repairs and credits. These conditions, though usually minor, are non-negotiable. Both parties must accept them to move forward. In this example, let's assume the insurer approved the property with conditions. It would then be buyer's turn to act. The thread will have an active form to record buyer's decision. And once again, there are 3 scenarios in which things could play out. After reviewing the inspection report and condition put forth by the insurer, the buyer can pull out of the transaction. As this is the inspection period, the buyer reserves the right to pull out of the deal if the home condition misses his or her expectations. Accordingly, the parties will be notified that the transaction has failed. The buyer can select the second option to indicate his acceptance of conditions proposed by the insurer and willingness to proceed with the purchase without any additional conditions. Buyer's decision is accordingly recorded on the thread. If the buyer wants to accept insurer's conditions, which is a must for continuing the transaction, but add additional conditions for repairs or credit, he would select the third option in the form. Accordingly, the active form extends to show an interactive table for additional conditions. Buyer can add his conditions before submitting the form. Unlike insurer's conditions, these are negotiable requests for repairs or concessions made by the buyer. Moving on, let's assume the buyer too has approved the report with additional conditions. It's now the seller's turn to act. As one would expect, this too can play out in 3 different scenarios. After reviewing the report and conditions put forth by other parties, the seller can pull out of the transaction. Accordingly, the parties will be notified that the transaction has failed. In the second scenario, seller accepts all conditions put forth by the other party and agrees to proceed with the sale. The action also means that parties have reached an agreement on the repairs and credits after reviewing the inspection report. In the final scenario, seller accepts insurer's conditions but counters buyer's additional conditions. A counter is simply a proposal back to the opposing party with changes to the original conditions. Assuming the seller chose the third option and countered the buyer's terms, it is buyer's turn to act once again, and the thread will have an active form to record the buyer's decision. Similar to the main terms negotiation step, there's no rule of how many times one party could counter the opposite party. However, users are informed about the risks of dragging a deal out, such as deal fatigue. To keep things simple in this example, let's assume the buyer approves the counter proposal and the parties reach an agreement. That brings the stage to a favorable end, and now the buyer can return to the transaction workspace and work on the next stage. With inspection out of the way, the title search is initiated to determine and confirm property's legal ownership and uncover title defects, if any. By consolidating and managing the entire process under one roof, we create great efficiencies and accountability. For the most part, title issues are rare, and there isn't much to worry about on this step. In any case, the buyer receives updates as the stage progresses. Buyer's payment method is debited to place an order for title report and analysis. The buyer is accordingly notified about the order. The buyer receives notification when the transaction coordinator obtains the report and uploads it to the system. At this point, the title agent reviews the report and submits his analysis. On the rare occasions a title issue is found that cannot be mitigated, the parties are notified and the deal is terminated. If title comes back clean, the parties are accordingly notified and they can now proceed to the next stage. As parties work toward closing the deal, the logs on the transaction page are updated with the latest activity. In the next stage, the system tackles the binding of the insurance policies. Inside the insurance module, the buyer can work and track progress on the title and property insurance binders, but let's cover the former first. The system requires the buyer to select a policy type before the title agent can bind a policy. Accordingly, the buyer's selection is recorded on the thread. In this case, we assume the buyer has opted out of owner's policy, so our system checks if the transaction requires a lender's policy. Different deals require different coverages. For instance, in a cash transaction, a lender's policy would not be applicable and a step would be marked complete. In most cases, the lender's policy will be applicable. Considering the coverages, the title agent now prepares the title policy binder and uploads it to the system for the buyer to sign. As with all documents, we encourage users to review the content and ask us if they have any questions before signing. The signing of the binder marks the completion of all steps in the title insurance section. Now the buyer can work on the property insurance. Much like the title insurance section, the buyer is required to select a policy type in this section too. The selection is recorded on the thread and other parties are accordingly notified. The insurer prepares a property insurance binder and uploads it to the system for the buyer to sign. Once the binder is signed, the property insurance binding process is also marked complete. The buyer can now proceed to the next stage. Back to the transaction page. Activities are logged for each stage, but in some cases the list could run long, like in this stage. The user sees the latest updates at glance but has an option to view the entire activity log on a pop-up window. With policy binders signed, the system now determines whether the appraisal report requires revalidation. Usually appraisals are good for 90 days. If the seller-ordered appraisal can last till the closing date of the transaction, no further action is needed and the parties can move to the next step. Once again, our consolidated process management reduces any uncertainty on this step as the stage is programmed based on the lender's guidelines. Should the system detect that a revalidation is required, the buyer is prompted to order an appraisal. The appraiser coordinates with the seller through the showings manager and uploads the updated report to the system. The buyer receives updates as the stage progresses. Assuming the report came in line with expectations, the stage will be marked complete. The system will prompt the lender to initiate a final review of the buyer and submit conditions that need to be addressed, if applicable. Our streamlined process is structured to reduce, if not eliminate, these conditions altogether. The buyer must submit requested documents through the loan application thread linked to the transaction. Once again, there are two ways the lender could react. Although extremely rare, the lender reserves the right to reject the loan application even at this point. Assuming all conditions are met, the lender will issue the clear to close letter, which is essentially the letter of final approval. It means that any conditions that had to be met for the loan to move forward have been met. This letter clears the way for the closing process to begin. In the final stage, the closing agent prepares and shares the closing packages and fund transfer instructions with the buyer and seller. Each party will have their own set of closing documents. Our system is designed to allow users to review, sign, and notarize documents electronically on any device. The buyer can review documents in the package, for example, the settlement statement, before signing them. Our transaction coordinator is available at any time to answer any questions. The buyer is directed through each field that requires signature and initials, and a notary public confirms and verifies each input using the most advanced identification and recognition technologies. Our system makes sure that both parties execute all closing documents as they approach the closing date. After signing all closing documents, the buyer must confirm the transfer of funds to the closing agent's account. At settlement, the closing agent verifies all documents and finalizes fund transfers after paying out all incurred expenses and any existing debtors, such as the seller's current lender. The agent ensures the orderly transfer of the title from the seller to the buyer. The transaction is then closed. That's the end of the buying process. The buyer has successfully acquired his new home and saved thousands of dollars in the process.